All right. Well, welcome everyone. I'm delighted that you are able to join us today for Minetta Transportation Research Snaps webinar. My name is Dr. Karen Philbrick, and I'm the Executive Director of the Minetta Transportation Institute at San Jose State University. For those of you just joining us for the first time, MTI leads two competitively selected consortiums. The first is the California State University Transportation Consortium, funded by the Road Repair and Accountability Act of 2017. And the second, a nationwide competitively selected U.S. Department of Transportation, UTC, the Minetta Consortium for Transportation Mobility. Together, we unify and focus the efforts of outstanding faculty members and institutions that represent the geographical diversity, diversity in expertise, diversity in student population served that makes our nation strong. So our mission is to increase the mobility for all, and we do that through surface transportation research, technology transfer, education, and workforce development. During today's webinar, if you have questions for our presenter, please put those in the chat feature, and we will have a robust dialogue at the end of her formal comments. Also want you to know that we are videotaping this so that it can be available for later download on our website and promoted through social media. So on to the good stuff. Today's webinar explores how widespread autonomous vehicle use will impact traffic law violations and current government revenue schematics. States and localities have a unique opportunity to rethink and replace current practices, since these vehicles will likely commit fewer traffic offenses. Governments can begin to reallocate resources that are currently invested in writing tickets, defending the charges, and pursuing the debt, in addition to the opportunity to reevaluate the considerable equity issues that autonomous vehicle adoption may further highlight. On that note, it gives me great pleasure to introduce today's presenter, Salika Josiah Talbot. She's an MTI Research Associate and Professor Lectorial at American University in Washington, D.C. She researches and educates on autonomous vehicle policy, impacts on government, OEMs, and stakeholder communities. She was formerly the Deputy Administrator for the State of New Jersey Motor Vehicle Commission. She was in charge of all operations for state services. She was the Director of Field Operations for the FMCSA, also known as the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. She has over 18 years of experience as an attorney litigator, and today she shares with us her knowledge and expertise. Salika, please take it away.
Good morning, Dr. Philbrick, and thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity to bring attention to my research and really the ramifications that traffic fines and fees have had on people throughout the United States, and how we can use autonomous vehicles as an impetus to make some changes to what now is an unequitable system. So how many licensed drivers do we have in the United States? There are 230 million people who are licensed to drive. And each day, 112,000 people across our country receive traffic tickets. The average ticket is $150, which is approximately $7.5 billion a year in revenue for states and localities. There are 41 million speeding tickets written, and the average law enforcement officer is bringing in $300,000 in traffic fines and fees, with only 5% of them being contested in court. It's just a lot of money going into the coffers of states and municipalities. The most common way that people interact with law enforcement is through citation. 44% of all face-to-face interactions between people and the police is over traffic enforcement. A lot of this money collected will go to road construction and city needs, police officer salaries, county and municipal government function. Municipalities and states have come to rely on this revenue in order to run government and pay for services. There's a financial incentive for law enforcement to write these tickets. but the cost of paying a ticket has disproportionate impacts based on your socioeconomic circumstances. A ticket of $150 weighs on a household much differently, depending on if the ticket is issued to a lawyer or a doctor, or even a teacher, than to someone who's a gig worker or not even making a minimum wage salary. In fact, a story that really has resonated with me was from a high-powered attorney who stated, getting a ticket is the price that he is willing to pay to drive the way that he wants to. Just let that sit with you for a minute. He doesn't care about the ticket, gets to drive and do what he wants. Initially, traffic tickets and fines were supposed to be a deterrent to behavior that was dangerous for the driver, motorist, and pedestrians on our roadways. But clearly, it's morphed into something else. It's not only not a deterrent to a large portion of people who are receiving those tickets, but for those people who can't afford to pay those tickets, it's pushing them into the shadows or creating disastrous financial burdens on them. Often what will happen for people who can't pay their tickets is the court will add a fee for non-payment. So you can't afford to pay the underlying ticket because the fine is too much based on your income. And now we have an additional sum of money on top of that. And sometimes that can grow exponentially. It can result in people's licenses being rescinded or suspended. It creates a host of people who are now driving without a driver's license and likely without insurance. It can impact credit scores and have devastating economic consequences. Meanwhile, you might find several instances of people who regularly receive tickets for a series of bad driving behavior, but because they can afford to pay them, they just continue to pay and drive the way they want to. Let me use, for example, a person who makes $15 an hour. That's $30,000 a year in gross salary, a little bit more than $400 a week after taxes. That $150 ticket would severely impact their household and cause a person to make a decision between paying rent, buying food, or paying their ticket. In that case, it's not a deterrent, it's an elephant crushing the recipient of the ticket. And let's explore the top 5 states when it comes to the cost of speeding tickets. Number 5 in the United States is the state of Arizona, where a fine for a speeding ticket is approximately $250. That's for 10 miles over the speeding ticket. And in the state of Arizona, they tack on $50 at each 5-mile-per-hour increment over that 10-mile-an-hour speeding. In New York, the speeding ticket average is $300 an hour. These fines can go up to $600 for first-time violators. And in Mississippi, one of the poorest states in our country, a fine for speeding is approximately $300. Alaska, you think of this state with all this wide open territory, but in truth, if you get a ticket in Alaska, the maximum penalty for first-time offenders is $300. And wow, when we talk about the number 1 state in terms of a fine punishing first-time speeding offenders, Nevada, that fine can be up to $1,000 for speeding for the first time. Crushing financial numbers. And this is by no means anti-law enforcement officer and traffic officer. In fact, what it is a recognition of the circumstances that these officers are placed in. You're asking them to just sit and wait, and in hopes of catching someone committing an infraction rather than in relationship with the community. And it's not just law enforcement. I practiced as an attorney for many, many years. And although traffic infractions are civil violations in most places, in some states, like in Georgia, they carried criminal misdemeanor charges, again with fines of up to $1,000. So what happens to a driver if they can't afford to pay these tickets? In those instances, they can find themselves on probation and now incurring a monthly supervision fee in addition to the fine. And I can attest that in the really small municipal courts with little oversight, they are egregious as they're often allowed to keep most of the revenue that they're collecting. And judges, like law enforcement officers, are under pressure to show that they can bring in revenue. Government budgets for the expectation that you will be caught violating a traffic law. And in many places, officers have had quotas. They need to meet on a monthly basis to catch citizens. It's a recipe for disaster. But as we speak, company after company, not just in the United States, but around the world, they're working on perfecting autonomous vehicle capability. True autonomous vehicles will not go over the speed limit. They won't run red lights. They will not drive distracted. They will not drive drunk. They won't break traffic and vehicle laws. There will either be less revenue from infractions when autonomous vehicle is in widespread use, or there will be an increased scrutiny on often lower socioeconomic groups that may not be initially able to afford these vehicles and find themselves still driving. So now is the time to look ahead, to find new revenue streams for the government agencies and allow for the widespread use of these vehicles across socioeconomic communities. Too often, violations of traffic laws become fines for being poor and not a deterrent for bad motoring. What is a true autonomous vehicle? One that is driven by artificial intelligence, is capable of all of the maneuvers that a human driver would perform on the roadway. A true autonomous vehicle is programmed to obey all traffic laws and therefore will not be subject to the current scheme of fines and fees that are often levied against human drivers. I was recently in Arizona, Tempe, and as you can see from the slide, I had an opportunity to ride in an autonomous rideshare vehicle. The car required me to have a seatbelt on before it would move. And even when I momentarily took my mask off, the vehicle reminded me that I needed to keep it on. The vehicle would only operate if I was obeying the law, and in turn, it only obeyed the law. No speeding, no distraction, no running red lights, no wild lane shifts, operating strictly and only within the law. So, what will the myriad of municipalities and states do when autonomous vehicles eventually become widespread? It will frankly be an uprising if they only concentrate on those who can't afford them. And if law enforcement traffic officers only concentrate on those very populations, they aren't even able to pay the fines right now, that revenue from traffic infractions will begin to dry up. There's a political economy of autonomous vehicles, government and legal impact on revenue and the economy, and the value to the electorate at large. Today, for equity and sustainability purposes, we need to look at other means to fund government and also whether these streams of money are even necessary. If we hire traffic enforcement officials to bring in revenue just to pay for traffic enforcement officers, well, here's an easy solution. Phase out the traffic law enforcement officers. Do not backfill them as they retire. As autonomous vehicles become more widespread, you won't need the same number of officers to police motorists. Communities have had an expectation of the need to pay for services, but they're more apt to pay for services that are supporting them and their families, not paying to support services that put them in some kind of peril. My work around equity and autonomous and electric vehicles centers around the notion that transportation is mobility and mobility is freedom. But freedom shouldn't be something only the rich can afford. That freedom of movement should be part of the fabric of America, where we dream and desire and should have to be all that we can be without the pressure from government burdening that movement for the less fortunate. With autonomous vehicle technology, we have the potential to create a level playing field, to rethink transportation networks, to allow for access to quality food, regular healthcare maintenance, and good jobs, and the opportunity to be free from fines and fees for human driving behaviors. Thank you.
Salika, that was just outstanding. Thank you so much for sharing those words. And I particularly liked when you said transportation is mobility and mobility is freedom, because it reminds me that the difference between having and lacking access to mobility options is the difference between having and lacking access to opportunity. And so I just really appreciate you underscoring that important message. We'll get into the Q&A right now, but first I'd like to welcome Amy Stearns, our grant manager from the U.S. Department of Transportation, and Mort Downey, one of our emeritus Minetta Transportation Institute trustees, and to all of our other friends and guests, it's very nice to see you today. We do have one question in the chat, and it refers to your example, Salika, with a person considering a speeding ticket cost really being worth it for driving the way they please. This person wants to know why this individual might want an AV. It would go too slow for the way they choose to drive.
Well, I think, there are a lot of things that are surrounding that kind of behavior on the roadway. People want to get from point A to point B. Some of that speeding is to make up for congestion in other parts of their travel and their commute. One of the things that we anticipate as we look at the ability for widespread autonomous vehicle usage is to reduce congestion on the road. If the bulk of traffic is then moving freer, the need for speed reduces significantly.
The need for speed. I like that. I think that's a line from a movie, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Let's get it right into some of the questions that were submitted at the time of registration. Salika, can you quantify how much safer autonomous vehicles are versus regular vehicles with a person behind the wheel? We've heard different statistics, like even a drop of up to 94% in human-caused accidents, but can you tell us more about that?
Sure. Well, safety has got to be paramount. We shouldn't be building just for the sake of building, but how can we problem solve here? So we see almost 40,000 people dying on roadways across the US every year in traffic-related accidents. Many of those crashes involve speed, involve distraction, and since autonomous vehicles won't conduct those kinds of human behaviors, we can sort of eliminate them. But it doesn't mean that every single crash will go away. There have been statistics, yes, studies that say anywhere from 75% to up to 95% of crashes will be eliminated. And from a safety standpoint, when we're talking about 40,000 lives, that reduction, not just in the lives that are lost, but that frankly, the hundreds of thousands of people who were injured and the hundreds of millions of dollars in property damage, we have an opportunity to reshape not just what happens to the person on the roadway, but to reshape emergency room medicine, dollars that we use for not just law enforcement, but for police and emergency responders, and a ripple effect across the nation in a positive direction, taking dollars out of crash response and putting them into other services that better support the communities at large.
Such an important response, and you've reminded me that a difficult impact to quantify is the untold cost on the survivors' emotions. So those family members of those up to 40,000 victims who lose their lives annually, and the steep and significant impact that has on family units. This is a very interesting technology that certainly has the potential to make a tremendous impact. And that leads us to our next question, which is how can legislation keep up with like technology advancements? There seems to be a tension there. How can we work more effectively together with policy and legislation?
Well, my initial response, or sort of that gut response for me, is let's just get something done, because we don't have any federal legislation sort of sweeping to address the autonomous vehicle industry. What we've had so far is a guidance, a policy. This is what we would like to see. But we haven't had true legislative bumpers for the industry to work within. It's not a matter of even keeping up. It's a matter of putting some requirements in place. I would have said a week ago or a year ago, there are going to be really some bad consequences if NHTSA or FTC doesn't put some guidance in place for people who allege they have autonomous vehicle technology in their cars. And sure enough, over the weekend, this horrible accident, this horrible crash involving what we will have to only wait and see, likely surrounds some notion of autonomy in the vehicle. We can say as states and as the federal government what the levels of safety need to be. There shouldn't be an expectation that the only way to have widespread use is if you can promise 100%. It's not a reality. But can we improve? Is it better than what we have now? Are you assuring me a vehicle that won't speed? Are you assuring me a vehicle that won't be distracted? Are you assuring me a vehicle that only operates within the traffic rules and laws of the jurisdiction that the vehicle is operating in? These are not difficult parameters. So when we see an alleged self-driving vehicle that is able to speed without someone behind the wheel, that's not true autonomy. Because that vehicle is not required to operate within the traffic laws of the community in which it's driving. So I think that it's great to say we put safety first. I'm an innovator. I love this disruptive technology. I think it has so much promise, but that's not enough. The ability for companies to know where they can drive from state to state to state, across state lines, and they can map, that they can pilot, and then that we can educate, requires federal government to put some simple guidelines in. That will go a long way in moving the industry forward.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you for that. And we have a couple more questions, but I do want to read a comment that we just received. Something to keep in mind about the statistic is that 94% of all crashes are related to human error. This participant just wanted to say that the elimination of the human operator does not translate directly into perfect vehicle operation. Testing has proven that the rate between failure of AVs is significantly more frequent than human drivers. So great improvements are necessary before any reduction in crash frequency or severity will occur. Salika, do you have a comment in response to that?
Well, I think that there are no absolutes, as I said. That
Yes.
There's not an expectation of a 100%. And yes, we are testing and still figuring things out in this space. But we've greatly improved the technology from where we were 10 years ago when I first became involved with autonomous vehicles, and where we are today, where I am frankly comfortable enough to sit in a autonomous rideshare with my family, with my children, and operate around a community. I'm not going to put myself in peril or danger. So I know that there is a level of comfort based on this geo-fenced vehicle operating on a roadway. Um, like any other technology, we have never had absolutes. I was a product liability attorney. There are design defects, there are manufacturing defects, and the ability to necessarily quantify exact numbers of the autonomous vehicle will 100% reduce X number of crashes. We're not there quite yet. But what we can say is, I'm on the roadway every day. I see people and they're operating a vehicle in a strange manner. And as soon as I pull next to them, they're on a cell phone, they're eating, they're reading. All these
Distracted.
behaviors, these distracted behaviors are leading to crashes,
Yes.
are leading to dangerous activities on the roadway. And we know autonomous vehicles will remove those activities.
Yes, thank you. And to one of our people who've logged in today, yes, the slides will be available. They will be on our website along with a video of today's presentation. I see that we have 3 minutes left, so I'll pose these next two questions relatively quickly. From our emeritus trustee, Mort Downey, he states that one hidden issue in traffic enforcement is the traffic stop for driving while black. Will this be a thing of the past in an AV environment?
Don't we all hope so? Again, as I pointed out in the research in my discussion, this is not anti-law enforcement officer. The community needs protection. But the community has also put these officers in really bad positions where they're going after what they perceive in many instances as low-hanging fruit. People that they presume are on a certain socioeconomic scale where they're going to be able to charge them with an infraction, or maybe they have an outstanding ticket or fine that they haven't paid for. When we eliminate or greatly reduce the reliance on this revenue, then that's not the focus of law enforcement. And I think when we find ourselves getting revenue from other sources, this driving while black will begin to dissipate some. Part of it is a culture, and part of it is some systemic issues that we have in this country. But I think we can greatly reduce this conduct when we stop requiring officers to have quotas and essentially pay for themselves by bringing in money in traffic fines and fees.
Thank you for that. Okay, we have one last question and then a comment. The comment first, the AV will not be concerned about the passenger's complaints about speed, route choice, etc. And as a passenger, the passenger can distract themselves with other tasks and not worry about the journey, but appreciate getting to their destinations without having to drive. And I think that underscores the point of many of your comments, Salika. And finally, the question, how do we generate a rational discussion in popular media to move the conversation forward instead of the current OMG reaction to initial AV and human interaction accidents? That's a hell of a question, David, a very good one. Salika, I can't wait to hear this response.
So this is, if you make me in charge of the world for a day, I am a huge football fan. And I think that we as a country often turn our entire attention to that one day when we have the Super Bowl. And for some people, they're watching the game. For others, they just can't wait to see what that commercial will be. For me, this whole notion around autonomous vehicles requires education, education, education. Could you imagine the opportunity to educate the nation and the world with a 90-second spot during the Super Bowl and talk about what the technology can do, where it can take us, where we are currently, where we hope to go, in all the benefits that create transportation, mobility, and ultimately freedom to move about the United States?
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. And with that last response, our time together has come to an end. I'd like to thank Salika for joining us today. Really very interesting content. For those of you who'd like to learn more, The complete report can be downloaded from our website, along with a 2-page research brief for those who just want the quick highlights. And to our attendees, thanks again for tuning in. We hope to see you at our next Research Snap webinar, Curbside Chaos, Managing the Curb, on May 18th with Dr. Susan Shaheen. Thanks again to all, and I wish you a wonderful day.